God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
We had the massive skull fractures of the base of the brain and immediate swelling and subarachnoid and subdural. So he had a large force applied to his head, which caused the brain swelling and the and the progression of the brain stem down through the foramen magnum that stopped the brain. It was a very forceful impact.
So I can't show you this because YouTube won't let me. It will block the video if I try. But what this doctor just said, and the reason why the defense team went and looked for steps to determine whether John O'Keefe's injury came from steps, is because of what Dr. Laposata just told us. She told us that there was so much force at the bottom of the skull that fractured the skull at the bottom, but the injury to John's head was in the middle top. Okay. So what she's saying is that he had to have fallen so that the base of the skull was immediately fractured in multiple places. But that wound, the gash, is higher up. And then it has those like scrape marks, like he hit and then went back. So in order to have both of those things happen, there must be stairs. Ah! There's no way he gets that from just falling backwards on grass. It's not possible. It's not possible. And that is the reason why she is so sure that he died so quickly. And once again, Hank Brennan can't help himself, takes out the shovel and just starts digging a hole.
You examined his brain after you looked at photographs. You can't tell us objectively when his brain swell started.
It started immediately after impact.
Mm-hmm. And you can tell us what the progress of that brain swell was by looking at his post-mortem photos.
By looking at the post-mortem photos and the post-mortem examination, I can tell the degree of force from the extensive skull fractures that were present.
What was the degree of force?
It was medium to large.
Well, that's a wide range. What do you mean? Quantified, medium
I'll
to
strike
large,
the comment,
please.
ask the question, Mr. Brennan.
What does medium to large mean?
Enough to cause a lot of fractures to the skull. He didn't just like sit down and lie down.
If he sat down and lied down, he probably wouldn't have fractured his skull, correct?
That's obvious, yes.
Right. And so when you're telling us you can identify that he immediately died or died within 15 minutes, I'm asking you for objective criteria. For you to give that opinion, I'm asking you what objective information you have. And so you said that there was a large amount of force, correct?
Sure, but because there were massive skull fractures and there's a lot of energy transmitted to the brain, starts swelling immediately.
How do you know this wasn't medium force and not large force?
Because of the extensive number of skull fractures.
So are you saying it was medium or large force?
Medium to large.
Okay. How much force is that? Can you quantify it?
No.
What other objective criteria do you have to support your opinion that Mr. O'Keefe died within 15 minutes?
My training and experience of seeing thousands of deceased people from head injuries and knowing some of their clinical course when they get immediate medical treatment, they don't survive.
And this case is going underwater faster than anybody could possibly salvage it. With every second that goes by, this case is over. At this point, if Karen Reed is not exonerated, something is amiss. Something is wrong, because the evidence is just undeniable. I can only pray that the jury understands what Dr. Laposata just told us, because her explanation today exonerates Karen Reed and points directly to the time between midnight and 1 a.m. to whoever was in that house. John O'Keefe, his phone was moving from the street in a westerly location towards the house. The injuries on his nose and on the top eyebrow, guess what would give you that injury? Look right where the knuckles meet the face. He has an injury here. He has an injury here. He falls backwards. He was definitely punched. There's no question about it. He was definitely punched. And then he was attacked by the dog at some point before he died, because there was blood. But it was a very short window. Could it have been during the time when Brian Albert would have taken the dog outside, because he did just get home? And everybody said, oh, the first thing that dad did when he got home is take the dog out. Is it possible that that was the time, the window here that this happens in? Absolutely. Is it possible that Brian Higgins is waiting in the Jeep? He's not inside the house when Karen Reed pulls up and lets John out. Is it possible that Brian Higgins is waiting for John, meets him right at the door, and the two of them walk into the garage? There's no entrance from the garage into the house. So whoever was in the house may never have seen John at all, and very likely didn't. Not if he goes into the garage, and not if Brian Higgins grabs him immediately and pulls him into the garage. John O'Keefe was dead 15 minutes later. And every second that Hank Brennan continues to badger this woman, she's going to make it more and more impossible that John O'Keefe could have been alive. I've been going back, like I said, and I've been watching some of the old testimony. And totally by accident, I stumbled upon evidence, the most compelling evidence that I have yet to see, that 100% convinced me that Brian Higgins is involved in John O'Keefe's death. Now, I was going to save this for after the trial, for my theory of the case video. But given everything that we now know, thanks to Dr. Laposata, I'm going to show it to you right now. Forget about the waterfall. Forget about the police station after. Forget about the butt dials. This is the moment where I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Brian Higgins is responsible, or at least holds himself responsible, for the death of John O'Keefe. Now, before I show you the clip, I have to give you some context. You need to know that Brian Higgins comes from a long family of firefighters, and that he was a lieutenant firefighter who decided to leave his position and become an ATF agent because he had a friend who was working for the ATF and said, come on, come work with me. That's probably the same friend that ultimately wiped his phone and gave him those texts that he eventually brought to the Canton police. So it was a very big deal because he comes from a long line of firefighters. Now, when I think about firefighters, what comes to mind, because I live in New York City and I have for 20 plus years, 9/11. And those men who were going up the towers at the World Trade Center when everybody else was coming down. And I've seen everything you could see about 9/11. You see all the firefighters saying goodbye to each other because they know most of them aren't coming back. So if you come from a family of firefighters, you come from a family of police and law enforcement and military, these people take that really seriously. Your grandfather, your father, their father, that's a big deal. And what we learn about Brian Higgins in this testimony that is handled so brilliantly by Alan Jackson, I'll tell you what, it's one of the most brilliant moments. This entire epic saga of these Karen Reed trials and hearings and the whole thing. Alan Jackson gets Brian Higgins to think about that. He gets him connecting to his integrity, to the way he wants to think about who he is. That he's the kind of man who would put his life on the line to save other people, to save other law enforcement agents. And when he does that, Brian Higgins tells us everything we need to know about his involvement in this case.
Correct?
Yes.
Nothing obstructing your view.
I mean, other than snow on the car.
Nothing obstructing your view outside, toward the lawn. Wasn't another car parked there.
No, I didn't. There was no vehicles in front of me, no.
It was the roadway was relatively empty.
There was no cars.
And you didn't see a body then either, did you?
I did not.
And as you drive past that flagpole with everything lit up and everything in your peripheral vision, you still didn't see a body on that lawn, did you?
I did not.
You're a former firefighter, is that right?
Yes.
Did that put you in a position of being a first responder?
Yes.
And you're currently a law enforcement officer.
Yes.
That puts you in the position of being a first responder, correct?
I'm also a tactical medic, yes.
Which means that you have training to be an observer. You're a trained observer, more than the average person, correct?
Yes.
You look for things out of the ordinary. You look for things that don't belong. As an investigator and former firefighter, first responder, correct?
Yes.
And you did not see a 217-pound man bleeding out on the side of the road, in the lawn, or in the yard, just to your right by that flagpole, correct?
If I did,
I didn't ask
would have
you
done
if you
something
did.
to help him.
I asked you if you saw one.
No, I did not.
And that's because there was no body there, correct?
I didn't see anything.
Because if there was a body there, you certainly would have seen that.
Objection.
Now I want you to put yourself in Brian Higgins' shoes. If you have absolutely nothing to do with John O'Keefe's death, this was not your brother, this was not your childhood best friend, this was not somebody who you were particularly close to. He's a guy who 5 minutes earlier, you were perfectly willing to take his girlfriend and start a relationship with her. Now, to be fair to him, he didn't want to do that unless the relationship was legitimately over. But he's not an idiot, and neither are any of us. Let's think about that. Was it really any better if Karen Reed was still in a relationship with John and then says, I'm going to leave you now, and then all of a sudden takes off into the sunset with Brian Higgins? Does that really look better? Is that better for Brian Higgins? I mean, I guess in his own mind. So if you have absolutely nothing to do with the death of John O'Keefe, why would you start crying on the stand about his death. Look at his face. What do you think is in Brian Higgins' mind right here in this image? You have Alan Jackson being very explicit on purpose in how he's describing the body of John O'Keefe. He says, there's no 220-pound man bleeding out. Is there? No, there's not. But Brian Higgins was there. Brian Higgins knows what happened to John O'Keefe. Brian Higgins saw John O'Keefe's body. And you know what? He probably tried to save his life. They knew he was gone. This is the look of a man who's contrite, a man who's sorry, a man who's responsible, who holds himself responsible for what happened to John. This is a man who believes it's his fault, who knows it's his fault. And you want even more evidence than this. At 11:30 on January 28th, 2022, Brian Higgins texts Karen Reed, well, like, so did you make a decision, Karen? Is that it for us? We're not stupid. Everyone on the planet knows what that text meant. Okay? Every one of us, whether you hate Karen Reed or not, you cannot deny what that text meant. We all know what it meant. Well, Karen, what's up? We've all seen the waterfall videos. We all know what the situation was that night. You know, I know Brian Higgins was texting John O'Keefe moments before he died. Are you coming here or what? Not Karen, John. And if he has nothing to do with John O'Keefe's death, nothing at all, when Karen reaches out 12 hours later, the very next day, the very day that John is pronounced dead, minutes later, basically, or what amounts to minutes later, Brian Higgins goes radio silent. Radio silent. Now, if you're going to try to make an argument that it's because he thought she was a killer and he didn't want anything to do with Karen Reed anymore, you are out of your mind. Go back and read those text messages again. There is never a moment where Brian Higgins does not indicate interest in Karen Reed. He never at any point says, well, you know what? Forget it, Karen. I don't want to do this. Even after Karen Reed says to him, John is on to us. And not only that, as time goes on, as it gets closer to this day, Higgins tries to double down. He says, you know, I really like you. I've always been attracted to you. I've always liked you. And here's the moment that he's been waiting for. It's his moment to swoop in and be the hero and be the shoulder that Karen Reed can cry on. And instead, not 12 hours later, after the well, Karen text, he disappears. He never reaches back out to her again. And if you are going to try to sell yourself on an argument that it's because they think Karen Reed is a serial killer, you are delusional. You are absolutely delusional. Because even if these people didn't have anything to do with it, which they did, these people are responsible. This man right here, this guy, this face, this person that you were looking at is responsible for the death of John O'Keefe. Is responsible for the death. This guy is the guy, okay? Maybe Colin's involved in some way, and yes, the dog was there. This guy is responsible. Brian Albert is the fixer. That's the face of a guy who knows he's a coward, who knows that his actions on that night and every day since, he took the coward's way out. That's the truth about what happened that night. And that's the truth about Brian Higgins. And that's a truth he lives with. There's no world where these people would have ever thought that Karen Reed did this to John on purpose. No world. They would have known. They were just hanging out with them. They saw them together. They knew Karen would never have hurt John on purpose. To this day, by the way, Carrie Roberts still thinks it was an accident. Now, she's obviously delusional and brainwashed and all of that. But I don't think she knows what happened to John that night. She's just an idiot who's been duped by Jen McCabe, who's working really hard to keep her close so that she never suspects them. But these people are who killed John O'Keefe. There's no question. And that is consciousness of guilt. Him not getting back to Karen Reed, that is consciousness of guilt. Even if he wanted nothing to do with her, he could have said, "I'm sorry, Karen." We're talking about 11 hours later, 11 hours after the well text message. He never says anything. He does not respond to Karen Reed's text. You know why? Because this man has a guilty conscience. And I've heard people joking, I think, about him being in rehab, but do not be surprised if he isn't there already, if that's not where he ends up. Because this is not going to go well. This is a guy who almost collapses, crying on the stand multiple times in his testimony throughout I guess it was 2 days. I don't remember exactly how long he was on the stand for, but in the days he was on the stand and the time he's on the stand, he cries 3 times at least. This is a sensitive human being who is not handling the situation well, who's trying really hard to pull it together, but is giving us very clear indicators of what has happened here. This man feels responsible for John O'Keefe's death. He knows what he's doing to Karen Reed is an absolute disgrace. And he's living with it. And it's not good. He knows. He's angry because Alan Jackson just called him out. I'll play it one more time all the way through so you can see it again.
And you're currently a law enforcement officer.
Yes.
That puts you in the position of being a first responder, correct?
I'm also a tactical medic, yes.
Which means that you have training to be an observer. You're a trained observer, more than the average person, correct?
Yes.
You look for things out of the ordinary. You look for things that don't belong. As an investigator, former firefighter, first responder, correct?
Yes.
And you did not see a 217-pound man bleeding out on the side of the road, in the lawn, or in the yard, just to your right by that flagpole, correct?
If I did,
I didn't ask
would
you
have
if
done
you
something
did.
to help him.
I asked you if you saw one.
No, I did not.
And that's because there was no body there, correct?
I didn't see anything.
Because if there was a body there, you certainly would have seen that.
Objection.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.